Introduction. Ian Terry. For Honor and Freedom is a gripping historical drama that chronicles the extraordinary life of John Darling Terry, a young Union soldier whose courage and determination shine through the darkest days of the American Civil War and the turbulent Reconstruction era that followed. From his audacious enlistment at the age of 15 to his heroic actions at the battles of Roanoke Island and New Bern, Terry's story is one of relentless bravery, earning him the Medal of Honor. But his fight did not end on the battlefield. As a major in the Freedmen's Bureau, he championed the cause of justice and equality for freed slaves, facing fierce opposition in the South. His tireless efforts to rebuild a fractured nation and his passionate testimony before Congress highlight his unwavering commitment to a just America. Through personal sacrifice and enduring spirit, John Darling Terry emerges as a symbol of the enduring fight for freedom and justice, making For Honor and Freedom an inspiring tale of one man's remarkable impact on a nation's history. 40 Acres and a Proclamation. Robert Terry. I visited my aunt on my mother's side with my wife and children. Decades later, the name, John Darling Terry, my aunt read from a Bible that day, continues to haunt me. I lost Dad at 10 and Mom at 13. I knew little about my father's family and my brothers knew little more. Having walked on the streets named after other people's families, I was a user of foundations trolled by others. Now the name, John Darling Terry, changed all that when it led to records that made me a son of the Revolution. It also provided reason for the ideas Dad instilled in us with his principles. My ancestors' service to our country unfolded like a well-kept flag. It opened with a Medal of Honor given to a boy who at age 16 captured a cannon. It led to the boy's grandfather serving with John Paul Jones in the Revolutionary War. But what John Darling did after being wounded when he refused to give up explained a lot of our shared principles. Once we are in a good fight, we refuse to quit until we win. In John Darling's case, his service was documented in files at the National Archives. He served in the 1st and 23rd Massachusetts Regiments, in the 1st NCCV or 35th USCT North Carolina, and 104th USCT Regiments. As a citizen volunteer, he commanded invalid soldiers from the Central Park Army Hospital during the 1863 New York City draft riots. That same year, he was appointed and served as a lieutenant in Wild's African Brigade. In 1864, he had his artificial leg shot off on the front lines of a Florida battle. But neither those acts, what he did as a 16-year-old sergeant to earn him the Medal of Honor, nor the unanswered question he asked the State Department, i.e., was he the only non-commissioned officer to serve with a missing leg? A fact in violation of military law at the time, were ample reason to cite his service out of the millions who served in the Civil War. No, all are overshadowed by what he did after the war ended while in Charleston, SC. After the war ended, John Darling and his commander were assigned to South Carolina office of the Freedmen Bureau. This office was commanded by General Saxton, who was named in Special Order No. 15 issued in January of 1865. The order was approved by President Lincoln and the Secretary of War. It set aside abandoned lands along the coast from Charleston through Georgia to Jacksonville, Florida. Before Lincoln was assassinated, Saxton issued some 40,000 of these land grants. Many were made to soldiers who enlisted in black regiments. After taking office, President Johnson issued a proclamation returning granted properties to former owners who took oaths of allegiance. Since Saxton's grants were made under provisions of Special Order No. 15, General Saxton denied applications made by former owners. On each denial he stated grants issued using the wartime Special Order No. 15 were as good as statute. His reason appears to be based on First Confiscation Act of August 1861. It authorized Union authorities to seize property, including slaves used to support the Confederate war effort. He may have thought it could be used to document a future case for wartime reparations. Since land granted in wartime fell under provisions of international law, land used in Special Order No. 15, therefore, changed ownership during the war. A presidential proclamation made after the war ended may not be valid because the lands changed hands during the war and the government no longer owned the lands. The names of officers who distributed the land grants with John Darling is a who's who of known abolitionists in uniform. He was assigned to the Bureau with his commander Major Delaney of the 104th USCT. Major Delaney was from Pittsburgh and was the highest-ranking black officer in the war. Delaney later made significant progress organizing former slaves along in what came to be known as Sherman's Plantation. General Wild, the officer who originally appointed John Darling, was also on Saxton's staff. When Saxton gave General Wild the position, he was quoted as saying he did so because he wanted Yankees whom he could trust and who shared his own views on Reconstruction. Colonel Beecher, brother of Harriet Beecher, a renowned abolitionist author, also served at the Charleston Freedmen Bureau office. At one point, Beecher returned land to a former owner and Saxton had to reverse his action. It was the only case found of an officer returning land to former owners at the Charleston SC Freedmen Bureau office. It seemed odd that it was done by a family member of highly regarded abolitionists. It suggested people may have held different beliefs when it came to slaves versus lands where land was a non-transferable family asset. President Johnson and his surrogates did what they could to stop General Saxton's staff from ignoring the intent of his amnesty proclamation. An obvious action was bringing individuals up on questionable charges to force their dismissal from the Freedmen Bureau. After General Saxton lost many of his staff, he was finally dismissed. An excerpt of charges Johnson made against General Saxton read, for refusing to revoke the homestead grants he had made to the freedmen. President Johnson's personal beliefs explain a lot about his actions. He was the only senator from the seceding states that remained in office. It is said it was why making him vice president was a sign of reconciliation for the peace to come after the war ended. Rumor is he was alcoholic and at the inauguration ceremony he was falling down drunk. Whether he acted out of disease or conviction is not known. What is unquestionable are his thoughts for the civil rights of black people. He expressed those in what he wrote after Congress passed the first Civil Rights Bill on January 24, 1866, but they failed to override a presidential veto in April of 1866. The reason he gave for his veto were: "This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men." Everyone would, and must admit, that the white race was superior to the black, and that while we ought to do our best to bring them up to our present level, that, in doing so, we should, at the same time raise our own intellectual status so that the relative position of the two races would be the same. The words are startling by current norms. Johnson, the converse of Lincoln, was the reason rights earned on the battlefield during 5 years of war were never realized in the Reconstruction. Besides injustices done to former slaves, there were injustices done to others finishing the terms of enlistments in the Southern territories. Until his death in 1919, John Darling documented what happened to one such officer. It is a story of disgrace and dishonor with irrefutable facts of what a vindictive loser tried to regain in defeat. Medal of Honors are highly regarded. The purge of 1911 verified John Darling's was deserved. It was undoubtedly a reason for why the 2017 Army Review Board heard and reversed his 1865 demotion. The 2017 decision is solid proof of what his 50-year effort succeeded in doing. The documents, letters, and requests he recorded show his demotion in 1865 was done for a political reason. If he was aware of that fact or just a naive young man from rural Maine in a lousy situation is not known. That he wrote beautifully penned and accurate accounts left the impression he was qualified and professional. Those files the National Archives store in their stacks provide reason why John Darling's story is one of the millions that need to be told. If for no other reason, his many files written on Freedmen Bureau stationery provide a rare accounting of what went on at the Charleston Freedmen Bureau office in 1865. A summary of what happened to John Darling after he was demoted provides further reasons for acknowledging his service. His whereabouts were difficult to follow in the Army's records immediately following his demotion. At one point he was charged with being AWOL. It was letters in his Medal of Honor file that finally indicated where he went. Saxton apparently let John Darling remain on his staff until his request for a special order was processed and denied. The special order requested that John Darling retain his rank as a captain. General Hunter was involved in the handling of the special order request. In June of 1865, Hunter served on a panel that found 7 conspirators guilty in the assassination of President Lincoln. General Hunter was a devout abolitionist, and in the early days of the war he provided free slaves with lands until ordered to stop by President Lincoln. At one point General Hunter requested President Johnson promote John Darling to a major. Hunter's request was denied by the same officer who demoted John Darling and denied the special order to reverse his demotion. John Darling letters used the stationery with the letterhead, Headquarters Assistant Commissioner, Bureau of Freedmen and Abandoned Lands, South Carolina and Georgia, Charleston, SC. He wrote 3 letters seeking help in overturning Special Order 501, a letter to the Secretary of War on October 25, 1865, a letter to Preston King on October 28, 1865, and a letter to President Andrew Johnson on November 3, 1865. The only one that had a chance of gaining the help he needed was the request to Preston King. Unfortunately, Preston committed suicide before he could have helped. The letterhead indicated John Darling was at the Freedmen Bureau where General Saxton was still in charge. An excerpt of the October 28, 1865, letter to Preston King read: "My great desire and ambition, sir, for the last 4 years has been to gain military rank. I have been in constant active field service for 2 years with my wooden leg and had once been shot in it at that and had performed the duties of me as captain for 6 months. Preston King was a political figure in New York who supposedly put a ring of bullets around his neck and jumped into the harbor. Preston was instrumental in getting Andrew Johnson put on the 1864 Republican ticket. Mrs. Lincoln stated on multiple times that Preston, like her husband, were assassinated by Southern terrorists. Preston was appointed the Collector of Customs in New York in August 1865 and drowned shortly after John Darling sent him the October 28, 1865, letter. By December of 1865, John Darling, unable to get his rank, felt he was being dishonored and did the unimaginable. He applied for a discharge. Corruption took from him his most prized possession, a sense of honor in service to his country. The same group of officers who sought his demotion quickly processed and approved his application. But, Before it was implemented, John Darling, while in D.C. on leave to join the Invalid Corps, had reason to cancel his request for a discharge. When he returned to the Southern Territories, he went to the offices of General Sickles instead of back to his old regiment. Sickles repealed what is known as black codes used by the local authorities to do things like allow masters to own servants and take away the right for black people to own arms. When Congress needed to get two-thirds override on the president's veto of the Freedmen Bureau renewal, a senator stated, "General Sickles has just issued an order in South Carolina of 23 sections, more full, perfect, and complete in their provisions than have ever been issued by an official in the country, for the security of the rights of the freedmen." It would have taken great effort to find and maintain what was needed to succeed in what Sickles did. A duty for which there was a great moral need, but one for which those who performed it suffered much in the way of admonishment and retribution. Officers like John Darling and Sickles paid heavily at times for what they did. The famous rail splitter cartoon showed Lincoln and Johnson putting the country back together with thread and might with no anger. That did not happen when the South resorted to assassination out of revenge for their surrender. The injustices Johnson committed did not go unanswered at the time. Congress passed a 10-year act to impeach Johnson that the Supreme Court later ruled was unconstitutional. The sin Johnson committed was in denying what was decided in blood on America's self-imposed battlefields. The lasting loss is what was done to American citizens, former slaves, that needed amends, not insanity. In December 1865, after Georgia made 3/4 needed, the 13th Amendment freed over 4 million people from slavery and made them citizens. At the same time, John was making plans in Washington to join Sickles' command in Charleston. Hypotheses proposed in this paper. Southern terrorists replaced President Lincoln with President Johnson to return property acquired by the United States in the war. In 1865, the largest continuous peace included 40,040 acres farms granted in Sherman's Reservation. John Darling Terry was illegally demoted for being on the staff that denied pre-war owners lands returned in accordance with President Johnson's proclamation. Grants made using General Sherman's Special Order No. 15 are as good as statue. The Journal of the Civil War Era Submission Manager. https://udo.be/hw4jbnp